A sleek black Mustang rolled into a quiet country garage. Behind the wheel, a high-ranking Army officer with a cold handshake and a smile that never reached his eyes. He wasn't looking for service. He came expecting obedience. But what he didn't expect was the woman behind the grease-stained overalls. Calm, firm, and completely unshaken by his authority, what started as a routine repair would spiral into a silent war involving power, retaliation, and one woman's refusal to back down. In a world where silence is often the safest choice, she chose to stand, and when the system pushed, she pushed back, with receipts. This isn't just a story about a car, it's about integrity, sacrifice, and quiet resistance. Let's start from the beginning. I've been under the hood of a car more hours than I can count. 15 years of grease under my nails and engine oil in my veins. My name's Jessica Taylor. I'm 38 years old, and I run Taylor's Automotive, a modest garage tucked along the edge of a quiet Kentucky town just a few miles from Fort Campbell. I built this place from the ground up after leaving the Army. No investors, no favors, just sweat, stubbornness, and a silent promise to myself that I'd never work for someone who didn't respect what I brought to the table. 7 years later, that promise still drives me harder than any paycheck ever could. Taylor's isn't glamorous. We've got a rustic vending machine that only accepts quarters and a coffee pot that leaks if you don't angle it just right. The floor is stained from years of spills we stopped bothering to scrub, but people trust us, and that's not something you can buy with marketing. My team? We're small, tight-knit. Marcus Wilson, my assistant manager, is an ex-Air Force with a quiet sense of humor and a relentless work ethic. Ethan Parker's young and cocky, but fast with diagnostics. And Danny Rodriguez is steady and thoughtful, the kind of guy who double-checks every bolt even after the car purrs like new. We give veterans a discount, not because it's good business, though it is, but because we know what it's like to serve, to sacrifice, to come home and still feel a battlefield in your chest. Around here, respect isn't handed out. It's earned every day, with every wrench, every handshake. A year ago, I took out a loan. A big one. We expanded the garage and brought in new lifts, diagnostic scanners, and tire balancers. It was a leap, but I believed in our work and I believed in my crew. Business was holding steady, but that debt loomed like a shadow over everything. Every quiet day felt louder than it should. Most nights I'd stay late, not because I had to, but because I needed to feel the hum of machines when the world went quiet. It was my rhythm, my peace. The old military motor pool had taught me how to make a machine sing again, and even now, years later, that rhythm hadn't left my hands. Clients came in, some loyal for years, others passing through. They didn't always notice the tiny female-owned and veteran-operated sign near the register, and when they did, some blinked twice. A woman mechanic still throws some people off, but I never let that get to me. I didn't build Taylor's to impress anyone. I built it to matter, to stand for something. And on one ordinary Tuesday morning in October, I had no idea that a black Mustang rolling into my lot would threaten everything I'd worked for. It was just after 9 a.m. when the car pulled in, sleek, spotless, black as midnight, with the kind of polished shine that said this driver cares more about appearances than performance. A 2023 Ford Mustang GT, brand new, out of place against a backdrop of muddy pickups and aging minivans that usually graced our lot. The engine rumbled low as it coasted into the bay. Then the door opened. He stepped out with a sort of controlled urgency, tall, mid-40s, silver streak sharp against a military buzz cut. He wore crisp slacks, a pressed shirt, and a watch that probably cost more than our best hydraulic lift. There was confidence in his stride, but it wasn't earned confidence. It was the kind that came from rank and habit, like a man used to people standing when he entered a room. "I need to speak to the owner," he said without a smile, looking right past me. I wiped my hands on the rag clipped to my coveralls. "That'd be me," I replied. He blinked once, almost as if recalibrating. "You're the mechanic?" His tone wasn't curious, it was incredulous. I didn't flinch. "Jessica Taylor, owner and head mechanic. What seems to be the issue with the Mustang, sir?" He shifted his stance, glancing around the garage as if expecting someone else to appear, someone more appropriate in his mind. Then he straightened as if accepting an unpalatable truth. "I'm Colonel Richard Brooks." There's a strange noise, high-pitched, intermittent. Steering feels Off. I need it fixed by tomorrow morning. I have a meeting with the base commander at Fort Campbell. I nodded, already listening to the hum of his idling engine. I'll need to run a full diagnostic first. We're typically on a 2-3 day turnaround, depending on the issue. That won't work for me, he cut in. I'm Colonel Brooks. This needs priority. That was the moment the temperature in the room shifted, not physically, but emotionally. In my time, I'd worked under real leaders, quiet professionals who never had to say who they were to command respect. Pulling rank out here, that was the first red flag. I kept my tone level. I understand, sir, but we don't skip the line unless it's a safety emergency. He exhaled sharply through his nose, the kind of breath men use when they think they're being reasonable but can't hide their annoyance. Still, he nodded. Fine, just keep me posted. I'll wait here. And so he did. Pacing, calling, checking his watch, muttering under his breath. I heard him sigh no less than 6 times in 20 minutes, each one louder than the last. Marcus rolled his eyes from behind the counter but stayed quiet. The air was thick with something unspoken. It took nearly an hour to pinpoint the problem, a failing power steering pump and a developing issue with the front suspension. Serious enough to warrant careful handling, not something you could or should rush. This'll take at least 2 full days, I told him. We have to order parts, let them ship in, and we don't cut corners on steering. That could be dangerous at high speeds. He stared at me like I'd just insulted his bloodline. Then his voice dropped into something darker. I don't think you understand who I am. I oversee procurement contracts for Fort Campbell, vehicle maintenance, shops like yours. You'd be lucky to land a contract. The implication landed hard. It wasn't subtle. Fix my car fast, and I'll throw you a bone. Make me wait, and you'll regret it. I swallowed the tension in my throat and chose my words carefully. Sir, I appreciate that, but we don't compromise on safety, not for anyone. He let out a humorless laugh. I'm not asking you to be unsafe. I'm asking you to be smart. Prioritize me. Other garages would jump at the chance. And maybe those garages are a better fit for you, sir, I replied, meeting his eyes squarely. For a second, he didn't move. Then something flickered in his gaze. Not defeat, not exactly, just calculation. He turned on his heel. Fix it properly, he said, his voice tight, but we'll see about those contracts. He brushed past Marcus, who stood frozen by the register. If your boss knew how the business worked, the colonel muttered, she'd recognize opportunity when it knocked. The door slammed behind him. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Marcus finally spoke. Yes, he could have helped the shop. Maybe we could have fast-tracked the parts without skipping steps. I shook my head. Not worth it. We don't bend, not for threats, not for favors. I believed it when I said it, but I also knew deep down that this wasn't the end of it. It was just the beginning. 2 days later, the Mustang was ready, fixed with care and precision, and the same integrity I poured into every job. New power steering pump, suspension realigned, every bolt torqued to spec. I even personally test drove it down the bypass and back. It is handled smoothly, silently, and powerfully. The invoice came to $1,850.00, a fair price. I double-checked every line. Every part and labor hour is documented. When Colonel Brooks returned, his demeanor was different. The smirk was gone, but the power still hung in the air like cloying and aggressive. He barely greeted me before snatching the invoice off the counter, scanning it like a prosecutor cross-examining a witness. $1,850.00, he barked, voice raised loud enough for the other customers to hear. This is robbery. He waved the paper toward Marcus. You marked these parts up 200%. I know what they cost. Don't insult my intelligence. I kept my voice steady even as heat rose to my cheeks. Our markup is well below the industry standard. That includes labor, diagnostics, test drive, warranty coverage. Only paying $1,200.00, he interrupted, pulling out his phone. More than generous. It wasn't a negotiation, it was an ultimatum. I glanced at Marcus. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched under the counter. He had 2 kids at home, a mortgage. This job mattered. I turned back to Brooks. We offer a 10% military discount, as we do for all service members. That brings your total to $1,665.00. He sneered. You're making a mistake, Miss Tager. He slapped his credit card down like a judge's gavel. I was going to recommend your shop for our base service contract. $80,000 a year, easy, but now he leaned in, eyes sharp. I'll be reporting this. Price gouging, predatory billing. You won't just lose the contract, you'll lose the uniformed customers too. He walked out with a satisfied swagger, keys jingling in one hand, phone already in his ear in the other. That night, I stayed at the garage long after everyone else had gone home. I didn't touch a wrench. I just sat at my desk staring at that receipt. My gut told me I hadn't seen the last of him, and I was right. 3 days later, I received an email. Short, clinical, cold. Your proposal for vehicle maintenance services has been disqualified due to concerns regarding pricing ethics and service reliability. We regret to inform you that no further consideration will be given at this time. CC to Colonel Richard Brooks. My heart sank. I read it again, then again. I'd spent hours putting together that bid, competitive rates, veteran hiring guarantees, safety protocols, everything. Just like that. The next blow came not in my inbox, but in the empty parking spots in front of the shop. Customers began canceling. 5 in 1 week. One of them, a loyal client for years, mumbled something about, hey, hearing things from the base. The rumors weren't just whispers, they had legs. Jess, Marcus said gently one morning, we're down 30% this month. Ethan's asking about his hours. We're not going to make payroll if this keeps up. I nodded, lips tight, my voice caught in my throat. I didn't know how to tell him I'd already postponed one of the loan payments for the new equipment. By December, the decline was undeniable. I watched the numbers drop like oil through a cracked filter. Reviews online started popping up, suspiciously similar in wording, all accusing us of overcharging military families. Anonymous, of course. It was more than sabotage. It was a slow strangulation. Then came the call from Laura Miller. She was the wife of a deployed soldier. She had brought in their minivan for a transmission replacement, a tough, expensive job. We gave her the military family discount and even let her split the payments. She called 2 days after picking up the car. Her voice trembled. Jessica, I'm so sorry. My husband's commander, Colonel Brooks, he found out we used your shop. He told James your work is unsafe, that you put our kids in danger. Now, James is panicking. He's thinking about taking the van to another shop for a second opinion. We can't afford. Close my eyes, the weight settling heavy across my shoulders. You don't owe me an apology, Laura. She sniffled. We thought we were doing the right thing. You did, I wanted to say. You still are. That night, I stared at a stack of bills under the dull buzz of a flickering overhead light. I was 1 month, maybe 2, from losing everything. Everything I'd fought for. Everything I'd built. For a flicker of a second, I considered it. Calling Brooks, apologizing, pretending I hadn't meant to offend. But that would mean accepting his version of the truth. And I knew in my bones I hadn't done anything wrong. Then, through the dim light, I noticed something glowing on the computer monitor. The security camera feed was still up. Footage from Brooks' first visit, his tone, his threats, all recorded. And suddenly, a new kind of clarity took hold. If he wanted to fight, he had just picked one with the wrong woman. The moment I saw that security footage, something in me clicked. It wasn't rage, it wasn't even pride, it was clarity. He tried to humiliate me, undermine my work, tear down everything I'd built brick by brick with nothing but rumors and a rank. But now I had evidence, not just words, proof. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I went into mission mode, the way I had back in my Army days when a convoy needed a complete rebuild before sunrise. By morning, I had pulled every record from the Mustang's repair, invoices, diagnostic logs, parts orders, timestamps, and labor hours. I compiled it all into a binder labeled simply Brooks. Then I dug deeper. I compared our invoice with 3 other local auto shops. Their prices weren't just similar, they were higher. We've been more than fair, meticulous even. And I didn't stop there. I created a new policy, the transparency guarantee. Every invoice at Taylor's Automotive would now include exact manufacturer part costs, markup percentage, never above 25%, labor breakdown by certified hours, comparisons to dealership prices. I posted it on our front desk, on our website, and in the waiting room. No more doubts, no more whispers. We were going to be the most transparent garage in the state, and I was going to prove it. But the paperwork wasn't enough. I needed allies. I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Major Linda Roberts, now retired. She was my commanding officer during my last tour. She taught me more about integrity and grit than anyone I've ever known. I told her everything, Brooks. The intimidation, the sabotage, the contracts. She didn't hesitate. This isn't just a bad actor, she said. This is an abuse of power, possibly procurement fraud. And she had contacts, important ones. Within days, I was on a call with a liaison at the Army Inspector General's office. As I explained every calm, professional, every detailed document, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't just protecting my shop. I was protecting every honest veteran trying to make a living outside the chain of command. Then came the breakthrough. Linda called late one night, her voice urgent. I've been digging. Brooks was transferred to Fort Campbell less than a year ago from Fort Benning. He didn't just transfer, Jess. He was asked to leave quietly. Same allegations, abuse of procurement power. The whistleblower backed off under pressure. And I sat there in silence, letting the truth settle in. This man had a pattern. And I wasn't the first. The next day, I reached out to Laura and a few of the military families who'd been affected. I didn't ask them to take sides. I just asked for honesty. If you felt we treated you fairly, I said a review would go a long way to counter what's being said. To my surprise, they rallied. Dozens of positive reviews poured in, detailed, sincere, balanced, a digital wall of support that pushed back against the anonymous smear campaign. Even James, Laura's husband, sent a message from deployment. My CEO doesn't get to dictate where my family goes for car repairs. I trust you, always have. Thank you for taking care of them while I'm gone. And then came the final piece. Sergeant Mike Daniels, the Army surgeon who'd been a loyal customer, walked in holding a folder. You didn't get that contract, he said, but I think I know who did. Inside were base maintenance invoices from the previous year. The winning contractor? Precision Auto Care. Their rates were nearly double mine. And the owner? Robert Brooks, Colonel Brooks' brother. It hit me like a shot to the chest, but not because I was surprised. I had suspected corruption, but seeing it in black and white made it real. This wasn't just personal revenge anymore. This was a fraud. Armed with evidence, testimonials, reviews, and documentation, I filed a formal complaint with the Army Inspector General. I submitted everything. Videos, financial records, written statements, and even my personal notes from every interaction with Brooks. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. Miss Taylor, the voice said, this is Captain Teresa Washington from the Inspector General's office. We're opening a full investigation into Colonel Brooks. We'll need you to come to Fort Campbell for a formal interview. I hung up and stared at the screen. This was it. No more silence. No more hiding behind uniforms and titles. The war had come to my doorstep. But this time, I wasn't the one backing down. I walked through the gates of Fort Campbell with my head held high and a folder clutched in my hands, packed tight with documentation, names, dates, and numbers. It was the kind of proof that made men in uniform sit straighter. Captain Teresa Washington met me at the Visitors Center. She was calm, clipped, her uniform sharp and pressed, but there was something in her eyes, a quiet fire. Beside her was Major Williams, tall and unreadable, the kind of officer who looked like he could detect a lie by how you breathed. They led me to a plain conference room with flickering fluorescent lights and metal chairs that scraped too loudly against the tile. Nothing fancy, nothing welcoming, and that was fine. I wasn't here for comfort. For the next hour, I laid everything bare. The quotes, the invoices, the military discount, the way Colonel Brooks had tried to manipulate me. First with charm, then with threats. I showed them the price comparisons, the security footage, the maintenance records from the other contractor, his brother's shop. I even played the voicemail Laura had left in tears. Captain Washington listened without interruption. No raised eyebrows, no notes, no commentary, just silence and sharp attention. When I finished, she leaned forward. "We've already spoken to several families mentioned in your report," she said. "Their accounts corroborate your statements. This isn't the first complaint about Colonel Brooks, but it's the first time someone brought receipts." Something changed in that room. It wasn't dramatic, just a shift in the air, like a storm about to break. 2 days later, it did. Colonel Brooks stormed into my garage like a thundercloud wrapped in brass and rage. His face was flushed, jaw clenched, hands twitching like he couldn't decide whether to grab a phone or a throat. "You filed a complaint against me?" He spat loud enough for every customer and employee in earshot. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Marcus, standing at the counter, reached under the register and discreetly hit the record button on the security system. I stepped forward, calm and composed. "I filed a truth report, Colonel. If the Army is investigating, that's their decision, not mine." He leaned across the counter, his voice low but venomous. "You'll regret this. I have friends in places you can't imagine. Your little garage, it won't last the month." I didn't flinch. "Is that a threat, sir?" He paused, realizing he'd said too much. Straightened his collar, stepped back. "It's a prediction," he hissed. "Good luck." And with that, he turned and walked out. That night, an email landed in my inbox. It was from Captain Washington. "We received today's footage. Brooks' behavior only strengthens your case. We're escalating the investigation. The Army Audit Agency has joined the inquiry." What followed happened faster than I ever imagined. 3 weeks later, I was summoned to another meeting, this time at Fort Campbell headquarters. The room was larger, more imposing. At the head of the table sat Brigadier General Thomas Hayes, flanked by Captain Washington, Major Williams, and 2 civilians from the Army Audit Agency. Brooks was there too, stiff, pale, a military attorney at his side. General Hayes spoke with the weight of a man who'd spent his life commanding others. His voice was calm but unyielding. "Miss Taylor," he began, "thank you for bringing these matters to our attention. After a thorough investigation, we've uncovered several troubling findings." He laid them out in black and white. Colonel Brooks had steered multiple contracts to Precision Auto Care, owned by his brother Robert. That company had overcharged the base by approximately $145,000, 0 cents, over 18 months. Brooks had used his rank to spread false information about my business after I refused special treatment. This wasn't his first offense. At Fort Benning, similar complaints had emerged, but the whistleblower withdrew, pressed into silence. Brooks' attorney tried to interject, but Hayes cut him off with a raised hand. "The evidence is clear, Counselor. The documentation, the financial trail, the recorded threats, it all aligns." Then something happened I never expected. General Hayes turned to me. "Miss Taylor, the United States Army owes you an apology," he said. "You operated with integrity under pressure. You stood your ground when it would have been easier to yield, and for that, you have our respect." He slid a folder across the table. "This is a revised request for proposal. We encourage you to bid again. This time, the process will be overseen directly by my office." Brooks stood abruptly. "This is absurd. She's one woman with a glorified truck shop. She can't handle the volume." The general's eyes narrowed. "Sit down, Colonel." The room went silent. Brooks slowly obeyed, but his power had drained from him like oil from a cracked seal. He was finished, and he knew it. "You are relieved of all procurement duties, effective immediately," the general added. "Further administrative and criminal proceedings will follow." I left that meeting not in triumph, but in peace, because I didn't win with anger or retaliation. I won with the truth. The news traveled fast, faster than I expected. Within a week of that meeting, Colonel Brooks was officially transferred out of Fort Campbell, pending a full investigation. Word around the base is he took the early retirement option, a polite way to push someone out before things get too messy. No trial, no headlines, just quiet fallout behind closed doors. But the silence didn't last. Taylor's Automotive was awarded a split military maintenance contract, part of a new Army initiative to include smaller local businesses in their operations. Instead of one large company taking everything, the work was divided, manageable, and fair, ethical. Our share was more than enough. I hired two new mechanics. One of them was James Miller, Laura's husband, fresh off deployment, skilled and quiet, but with gratitude in his handshake I'll never forget. Marcus got a raise. Ethan's hours were restored. Danny started mentoring an apprentice we brought in from the local vocational school. In the garage, it pulsed with new life. People came, not just soldiers, but civilians too, nurses, teachers, small business owners. Word had spread, not about the drama, but about how we responded to it. They came for the repairs, yes, but more than that, they came for honesty. Our transparency guarantee became a model for other shops. I started getting emails from mechanics in other states asking them to copy our pricing sheets. A few even drove hours just to visit and see how we ran things. Then, 6 months later, an unexpected visitor showed up at the shop. Robert Brooks, the colonel's brother. He looked different from the man I imagined. Older, more tired than arrogant. He stood awkwardly in the doorway of my office, hat in hand like someone walking into church. "I wanted to apologize," he said. I looked up, arms crossed, guarded. My brother, he's always been obsessed with status. When he said we could get those contracts if I moved the business here, I didn't ask questions. I just followed his lead. "You overcharged the Army by a lot," I said. He nodded, eyes low. "I know, I'm not making excuses. I've sold the business. I'm working to repay what we took. Not because I was forced to, because it's right." There was a long pause between us, but in it, something settled. I didn't forgive him, not completely, but I didn't hate him either. That kind of pain burns you out if you hold on to it. A year later, I was invited to speak at a seminar on military contracting at Fort Campbell, just a small event, nothing televised, a few rows of officers, small business owners, and support staff. I wore jeans and a black button-up, not exactly formal, but it felt right. I told the story, not of the conflict, but of the values behind it. I talked about how sometimes doing the right thing means losing in the short term, how integrity doesn't always pay instantly, but how it always pays eventually. When I finished, there was polite applause, and Brigadier General Hayes stood from the back row and approached the podium. He spoke plainly, but his words carried. Ms. Taylor's experience has led to reforms in how we handle local procurement. She reminded us that our values don't stop at the gate. Her courage reflects what the Army stands for, even when others forget. 2 months later, the vehicle maintenance facility on base was quietly renamed Integrity Center. Not officially in my honor, but the timing and the name said enough. As for Colonel Brooks, last I heard he moved to Florida, trying his hand at real estate. Rumor is, not very successful. I don't think about him much. Sometimes, though, when I see a black Mustang roll up, I pause. I wonder what would have happened if I had taken the deal, if I had said yes, played the game, fast-tracked his car, smiled, and stepped aside. Maybe it would have gotten that contract early. Maybe we would have avoided the backlash, the cancellations, the stress. But then I remember what this place is. Taylor's Automotive was never about shortcuts. It was about standing for something when it would have been easier to kneel. And that's the kind of business that lasts. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it comes in ripples, quiet but far-reaching. Weeks after the Army concluded its investigation, I started getting phone calls. Some are from small shop owners near other bases, others from soldiers' families who'd heard what happened, asked if I could help them draft complaints or understand their rights. Turns out what happened to me wasn't isolated. One woman, an auto shop owner outside Fort Bragg, told me she'd turned away a senior officer who wanted free labor on his wife's SUV. 2 days later, she lost her base service contract, but after hearing my story, she filed a formal grievance. Another came from a mechanic in El Paso. "We used your transparency model," he said. "It saved our business." Even the Army Audit Agency launched a quiet internal review. Several base procurement programs across the country were frozen for reevaluation. Contracting officers were rotated. Training on ethics was expanded. None of that made the news, and that was fine with me. I didn't want a headline. I wanted to change. Closer to home, things shifted too. Military families who had once avoided us came back. Cautious at first, then grateful. Laura Miller started volunteering to help new spouses navigate housing and services. James, now fully part of my team, became our unofficial point of contact for military clients. And Marcus, he started speaking at vocational schools, sharing what he'd learned about ethics and business from his time here. It's not just fixing cars, he'd tell the students. It's fixing what people assume about you and proving them wrong every day. Even Ethan, who once joked he was just here to turn wrenches and blast music, started staying late to help train the new techs. He told me once, almost shyly, "I used to think you were just tough. Now I realize you were holding the line for all of us." One afternoon, I got a letter, typed, formal, from a retired procurement officer who had been on Brooks' review panel years before. I didn't give his name, just an apology. "You reminded us that silence enables rot. I'm sorry I didn't speak up when I should have, but thanks to you, others now will." I didn't cry when I read it, but I did close the office door and sit with it for a long time. That letter wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who'd ever been told to sit down and stay quiet, everyone who'd been passed over, ignored, underestimated. They were watching, and now they knew you can win without giving in. That's the loudest kind of justice there is. Sometimes I still find myself staring at the old corner of the garage where that black Mustang first pulled in. The paint on the concrete is faded now, and the lift has a slight squeak when it lowers. We've patched the roof twice, replaced the waiting room chairs, and finally retired that leaky coffee pot. But the feeling, the purpose that built this place, it hasn't changed. It's stronger now. There's a quiet pride that hums through the walls of Taylor's Automotive. It's not in the awards, though we've gotten a few, or in the steady flow of new clients, though that's more than we ever dreamed of. It's in the way Marcus double-checks every invoice, on the way Laura brings in home-baked cookies for customers waiting with their kids, on the way Ethan, who once scoffed at schedules, now manages the weekly training board like it's sacred. Every bolt tighten here carries the weight of a lesson hard won. I've had chances to expand franchise even. People ask why I don't slap the name on other buildings, hire more managers, and rake in the growth. But this place was never meant to scale. It was meant to stand for fairness, for honesty, for quiet strength that doesn't need permission to exist. And sometimes when I lock up late and the bay is still and silent, I let myself breathe it in, not success, not revenge, just peace. Well, a few months ago, I was asked to mentor a young woman starting her own mobile mechanic business. Her name's Alyssa. She's 25, full of fire, and reminds me a little too much of myself when I started. Stubborn, serious, and a little scared of failing. She asked me, "How do you know when you've made it?" Didn't have a slick answer. But after a moment, I told her, "You've made it when the version of you who started this journey, tired, broke, underestimated, would look at where you are now and say, 'That's worth it.'" She nodded, wrote it down, and I saw in her eyes something I hadn't seen in myself in a long time: hope without fear. That's the thing about integrity. It's quiet. It doesn't beg for applause. It doesn't trend, but it spreads. It takes root in places you don't expect, inside people you'll never meet. And one day, without even realizing it, you built something that outlives the noise. Taylor's Automotive is just a garage, but it's also a statement. It says we don't cut corners, we don't chase shortcuts, and we don't kneel for power that demands silence. And if that's all I ever leave behind, then it's enough. More than enough.